Hello and welcome to John and James Live, where we discuss real world events in real time. Welcome, James. How are you today, sir?
I'm very well, mate. I'm very well. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. We're getting there, aren't we, with the content stuff? This coming thick and fast. It's quite a tiring game sometimes, content, isn't it?
It's
Yeah, it's no joke.
more
It is
than we imagined,
job.
I think. Yeah,
I think more than we imagine. Yeah, you've got to be organized. But anyway, we'll get on with it. So we're going to go Trump first and the Ukraine situation. We're going to go through that because that's changing pretty much. Well, it's not changing massively, but there's new sort of developments every day. And then we're going to go and talk about the OnlyFans phenomena. And in particular, we'll just concentrate on two of the creators in Bonnie Blue and Lilly Phillips. Sound good,
it's
James?
a mixed bag, isn't it? A smorgasbord. I mean, how do you segue from Ukraine Trump to OnlyFans?
Yeah, that's going to take a bit of doing, isn't it? Literally. But anyway, here we go. Trump. So Trump yesterday has called Zelensky a dictator. Which is obviously because he wasn't... I think you've in Ukraine that you've got to obviously have your term of when you're in power, but if there's a war on, then that term pushes back. So technically, there shouldn't have been a referendum in Ukraine, so it's legal for him to still be the president there. Mm-hmm. But is this again Trump trying to push some buttons to get things over the line? I think behind the scenes, maybe Zelensky's not playing ball as much as they want, and now they're starting to put their foot down on some pressure. Is that the way you see it, James?
Yeah, it's interesting rhetoric, isn't it? I think there's some, as you say, some buttons being pushed. There's kind of pushing and pulling and just cajoling to get the outcome that's required. So yeah, it's baffling. But it appears that it's only Trump that can not get away with it, but there's almost an expectation for him to use this sort of language. And when he does use it, we've kind of gotten used to it now. If it came out of the mouth of anybody else, it would be like, oh, that just came out of nowhere. But it's almost like the same kind of things are being said, and we just kind of accept it now because it is Trump.
So I never heard anything like it. Have you, James?
But it's almost like crying wolf, isn't it? That you do it for long enough, and then it's like accepted. You know that every time he speaks, there's going to be something that comes out that makes you go, I don't get it. I don't understand. So that when he does speak in that way, it's almost this inverse acceptance, isn't it?
Yeah. He sort of called him an average comedian. He really criticizes people personally. He's basically said Biden's was rubbish. And you never... I'm not going to say I like it because I think it's immature, but there's something in contrast which is refreshing in terms of not hiding those type of feelings. I think we're fatigued with politicians who just tell you what they think you want to hear, and you never really hear what they really think. That's where, even if you don't agree with Trump, and I don't agree with a lot of the things maybe he says and the way he comes across, but there's something refreshing about him just saying what's on his mind, even if it does come out a little bit crazy. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, there's politicking, isn't it? This kind of politician speak. They're coached on how to speak to the press. Yeah. And when asked the question, how do I answer that without actually giving an answer? And I think, again, with people watching TV and seeing stuff on social media, they become very aware of that narrative. It's like, well, if that's all you're going to say, and we're not getting a straight answer, and you're not challenging the questions, and you're not challenging the person asking the questions, and you're just kind of accepting it and giving this wishy-washy answer, then you get that apathy that people just go, well, what's the point? There's no point asking the question if that's all we're going to get in response. So what Trump has done, he's actually, he comes out on the attack, and he'll sort of go to the person that's asked the question and basically undermine them, almost attack their character, so that and you could see the person doesn't know what to do. The person that asked the question was like, I don't know what to do with that, because
it just hasn't
been seen before. It's just not been seen before. It's never been seen.
Never seen it before. So you think it's a problem that Trump is becoming friendly with Putin? How do you view that? For me, I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. I know a lot of people may disagree with that, but I'd rather them be on friendly terms than enemies. I think it's quite a dangerous position to be enemies, isn't it? A big nation like the US and Russia not getting along is probably not good, is it, for everybody else?
No, I mean, I think we've already talked about this. Any level of dialogue, if there can be some dialogue, it's got to be a useful, helpful thing, as opposed to just this kind of horrible standoff where one of them is kind of edging one way and then the other one's responding to that. And so it depends on the outcome, doesn't it? And only time will tell. So it's a difficult one to call right now. But, always in any situation, I believe if you can actually sit down and talk about it, you're in with a chance.
Yeah. I think that's really positive to be able to do that. I understand Ukrainians are going to feel disenfranchised if they're not at the table, and their world has been torn apart, and then you've got other big players who are taking over. But this is what happens, isn't it? It's sort of like on the school playground. If you're weaker and you're just expecting somebody to back you up, when that person doesn't back you up anymore, you're going to be in a bit of trouble. And it's sad. I get it. It's sad, and people want to keep their independence, and the country's been torn apart, and brothers, fathers, 12,000 civilians have been killed.
Yeah.
And it's a really dark situation. But
I mean, at what point do we learn from history when you see it's littered with situations like this, that, Poland in the Second World War, and then everybody else becomes involved and drawn into the conflict of, a weaker nation that's invaded for whatever reason. You can wrap these things up in any way, shape or form to justify it. And then it's how it impacts on the rest of the world economically, with sanctions and other things that you can then start to impose as a result. You can see Russia that have had a lot of oligarchs, money has been seized, territory's been seized, assets have been seized, in terms of a backlash to what's happened. How effective that's been, how impactful that's been is another matter. But everybody is then impacted. The ripple effect is wide.
Yeah.
So, how are we not learning from these historical occurrences that time and time again they happen? They just come under a different guise, and it's a different person. But there's almost a template that you can throw onto it and say, well, this is a carbon copy of that, and it's happening again, just in a slightly different way.
Would you think that it's better to strategically concede at the beginning rather than try to fight for the long haul, especially if you're from a disadvantaged position? Or is that giving them more impetus to then take more and more and more? It's a difficult one, isn't it?
I mean, you've got to take some sort of a stand. I mean, you can't just allow these things to happen willy-nilly and go unchecked. But mate, I don't have the answer to that. It's
because Trump reckons they potentially could have done a deal, at the beginning, and conceded maybe just a little bit of land, maybe to secure that border. I'm just relaying what's out there on the news, what he's saying. Yeah, many people will say it's all smoke and mirrors and lies, but what he's saying, you potentially could have.
You'll ever know.
People don't know. We can make what we see on the TV is just the surface, isn't it? Really, we don't really know what's going on on
curated for the
back
public
end of that.
Yeah,
but that's pretty much the latest at the moment. there. It's moving. I think Putin and Trump will catch up soon. I think it will be in the next couple of weeks. And whichever way, whether you love him or hate him, if this war does come to a close, thank God. Right? Let's stop wars as much as we possibly can, and let's try to negotiate a happy medium ground and rebuild, and hopefully the Ukrainians can rebuild their country and we can just be very civil. I know this is more of a securing of precious metals game, isn't it? I think this is all a financial global game, because I didn't realize how rich Ukraine were in natural resources, and they are quite a pivotal player, aren't they, in tech and resources in the future.
All strategic. It's very, very strategic. But as I said, the wider implications, the ripples that go throughout the financial world, not, let alone anything else, the atrocities that are going on, people are fundamentally dying, and then it's the impact on everybody else in terms of the instability financially that does affect everybody.
Yeah, I personally don't get the instinctual feeling that Putin is like a person who wants to take over Europe. I understand that's the fear, isn't it, of a sort of Hitler situation where you start with one domino and then you get a bit of confidence and you think, okay, maybe I'll take another piece, and then it keeps going from there. So I understand the fear of that. I don't know if there's any evidence to suggest that so far, going by his tenure.
Yeah. Well, you could look at it and say, well, he's tested the waters. You see how far to the line he can get before then there is the outcry and the ramifications of that. It's like, well, I can do that. Like, I can just do that a little bit, and maybe I'll push it a little bit further and then suck it and see.
Yeah, because we saw the downfall of the Soviet Union, didn't we? But we haven't seen really, I will double check, but we haven't seen like expansionist behaviors from him. We could say the Americans and the UK invaded Iraq, Afghanistan. You don't really hear of the same with Russia, do we? That they've invaded. This is maybe the first time in my lifetime that I know of. Don't quote me on that, because I'll have to research it, but it's not something that I've heard of from Russia being an expansionist nation. But who knows? Who knows? I just hope it just gets sorted out and we can build a better future. That's what we want, don't we, really?
That's all we
I think
want.
The best segue into the next part of the talk is, guess where the new owner of OnlyFans is from?
I have no idea.
He's an American Ukrainian businessman.
Seamless.
There we go. That was the connection. He is called Leonid Radvinsky. Acquired a 75% stake in OnlyFans parent company Phoenix International. Radvinsky, a Ukrainian-American businessman, also founded the cam site My Free Cams. So we're going to touch on OnlyFans, the whole concept of it, where it's come from, why it's growing, and the lives of some of the creators on there, because it's becoming quite pervasive everywhere. If you go on to, I don't really use X at the moment. I suppose it's probably a good platform for many. But I've got about 200 OnlyFans followers, and that's pretty much it. I don't know how they're doing it, probably through bots.
Yeah.
But it's kind of strange. It's all over Instagram,
big business, isn't it? It's huge business.
It's huge business. So it was founded in 2016. So actually not that long ago, the OnlyFans game, from a guy, English guy, Tim Stokely, Londoner. He's previously developed websites called Glam Girls and customs for you. So he's obviously an entrepreneurial type of guy. He's 41, born same age as me, 1983.
Wow.
And he sold that 75% stake to the Ukrainian American business guy. But in terms of the size of that company now, it's worth around 3 or 4 billion. That company. So it's a big old juggernaut of a business.
Yeah.
And in terms of, I just quickly do a little bit of an overview on that business model. So creators can earn through subscriptions, tips, and pay-per-view content. OnlyFans takes 20% commission, allowing creators to keep 80% of their earnings on that. It has over 4.1 million content creators and over 305 million registered users. Most of those being male. Creators being female.
How many creators, female creators to male creators on there? Have you got the stats on that?
The creator community is predominantly female, with women making up 84% of the creators on there.
Yeah.
And then most of the demographic of users is male. It's something like 93% or something like that. It's on here somewhere. So what do we think, James? What is going on with this OnlyFans phenomena? Why does it exist? And what's your thoughts on it?
Well, I guess I was just about to say, why are we talking about it? You know, why is this a subject for conversation? And I don't know, OnlyFans just suddenly seemed to appear, didn't it? It was like, came out of nowhere, and you're aware of it in the consciousness of people talking about it, and it comes up again in sort of social media and conversations and things like that. And you think, well, you know, sex is always sold.
Yeah.
You think of like, and it's, you know, going to lead us into pornography generally, but at the end of the day, I think, you know, somebody's seen that there was a gap in the market. There's a service that could be provided. I mean, I know somebody who came up with the first, or one of the first, telephone sex chat lines. You know, this is back in the sort of the 80s.
Yeah.
And it's a development from there, isn't it? It's obviously with the telephone lines to begin with. Now we've gone into webcams, makes it much more interactive, and any level of service, I guess. But again, I think it's a commentary on society that potentially we become more disconnected, and that people are then going online to find that connection with the opposite sex, the same sex. And it's been made incredibly accessible, very available, easy to connect to, I should imagine. Listen, I honest to God, I haven't been on there, looked at it, or done anything with it. I'm just
all right, James.
This is me being honest.
I promise I haven't got loads of accounts on OnlyFans.
I don't want to overblow that and sort of make.
You said that with way too much conviction, James.
I did, didn't I?
Way too much conviction.
He doth protest
it's
too
like
much.
pleading your innocence. Yeah,
but honestly,
it is an interesting phenomenon because because you know, people will do the porn stats in a second, but porn stats are crazy. But most of it is free now, so these people are actually paying money, which is interesting. The guys are actually want something more. They want something more than just the porn, don't they? They want this relationship, would I say, maybe with them, or a bit of a closer connection. Are they searching for something deeper here, James?
And I think it's in real time, isn't it? I guess they're sort of maybe making suggestions and in a sort of some kind of chatbot thing that's going on. I guess that is that connection, isn't it? That you're sort of you're paying for that service to get what you specifically want. It's a kind of a tailor-made thing, I suppose, where just watching porn is obviously much more passive. You've got all that choice that you can go for, but at the end of the day, I guess there is that control element and it being tailored to the individual. So again, I can see if you're not in that sort of relationship, and I guess you then start to think of where this is going in terms of the future of that accountability piece, or when you're in a relationship that you have to be mindful of somebody else's emotions, feelings, you've got to navigate that. And with this, it seems so kind of transactional. There isn't that emotional element, although you can manufacture it, I guess, but you're not having to deal with the nuances in the reality of a situation, that there is that kind of control, that you're sort of dictating what happens. And I guess there's things that you would say to that person that you wouldn't say to your partner if they exist. So I see it and you think, well, where's that going in terms of like sex dolls and things like that, now that you can kind of program and with AI and everything else? It's, where do we go with that human to human connection, that actually you can curate your own experience that doesn't involve somebody else's emotions and upbringing, and it's much more sanitized and designable, that very much now, I guess, with sort of online dating, that you can go in and put your profile, your preferences. I'd like somebody who's 6'2", that they've got brown hair, they've got blue eyes, tap it in, press send, and then you get this whole kind of populated list of people that would match your criteria. Whereas you go out into the world, you're kind of given what you're given. You're encountering the people around you, but how can you possibly start to interact with somebody, seeing them in a social situation? This is kind of skewing now to kind of online dating, but if you go to a club or to a dinner party, or you just meet somebody in the supermarket, you can see how they interact with people around them. You can see how they're dressed, whether they smile, whether they're looking happy, whether they're looking sad, all these kind of nuances that you don't get necessarily in this kind of two-dimensional or very one-dimensional perspective of the online space. That yes, you can take your time to get to know them. Yes, you can sort of type away and have those conversations. I get it. And yes, there's video cameras as well if it gets to that stage, and then you meet them in person. But it's like it just seems to have jumped this gap between that initial observation that you would have in real time and reality, to then suddenly be thrown together in the real life situation, having only been online previously.
Yeah, because you're bypassing the feelings of sort of shame and guilt, aren't you? And rejection and fear, probably those lower consciousness levels. That's where, in reality, that it opens you up to those situations. So you're not going to feel that same shame if you're into some weird sexual kink, or you're not going to get the rejection from the woman.
That's it.
In certain situations. So I
think
that's
fear
where
around that. The fear is around that.
And we are hardwired, aren't we, James, for sex? It's not really talked about that much in society, but realistically,
you'll do it.
It is.
You'll do it.
Well, I don't think many people. Apparently, 60% of young boys are not doing it. Well, they're doing it to themselves, but the stats for sexless people is rising because of that. But it is, like I said, we have got these biological urges, and it's probably like the equivalent of sugar, I guess. In the past, if we saw honey, we would probably gorge on the stuff, and now the sexual images and things like that are available. So it's a bit. It's hard for the human mind to comprehend.
And then you, at the other end of the spectrum, sex addicts and porn addiction and all those sort of things that, seem to go hand in hand to an extent. I say the sex addiction is possibly, I would say probably porn addiction is more prevalent than maybe the sex addiction, but they all, again, form part of the same sort of cycle. That kind of attachment.
Was it prevalent in your youth, James? Porn and that type of stuff. Was it a prevalent?
Well, it was magazines, wasn't it? It was like top shelf stuff. It was
but you wouldn't be able to get hold of it, would you, unless your dad or someone had it? So how would you wouldn't have access to it, would you?
No. And again, it was kind of, it was patrolled. It was controlled in the way in which you had to be tall enough to go get it from the top shelf. They were out of reach of children for that reason.
It was out of reach, of course.
And even, I used to work for a transport company, and there was a particular shop in the docks, and they'd have all these magazines up there, and guys would come in, but they'd put another magazine over the top when they went to buy. It was all this. It was there readily available in newsagents, and as a kid, you could look up at it and you could see them.
Yeah. Well, we had in newspapers was a thing. We had Page 3, Daily Star, didn't we? So that was really the entry level to some type of erotic imagery, wasn't it? Which sounds kind of weird now, doesn't it? Thinking about it.
Well, again, goes back to the sort of watershed. We've talked about that before, and sort of the Mary Whitehouse of censorship and making sure that TV was appropriate for kids and nothing was shown before 9 o'clock that would corrupt them, influence them. And then the onset of MTV, and then it was 24/7. And that's just then developed into the internet, where anybody, unless the parent puts the parental controls on it, that anyone can log on and watch porn. So, the availability is so much, and you think, well, is that then a situation where we're becoming desensitized? Because it was always the mystique of finding a porn mag, and it was a little bit exciting. It was you knew it was wrong in your head. You had this narrative that it was wrong, it was naughty, it was this. It was like you certainly didn't want your parents to catch you with a magazine or anything like that. So it had that sort of mystique around it. Whereas now, because it's so accessible, has it lost that? It's a little bit like Victorian times of having tablecloths that would cover the legs of the tables, because apparently that would get people excited if you saw a table leg. So in terms of the desensitization that we're going through, that decade upon decade, we're becoming, and this kind of brings us back to the OnlyFans and then Lilly, Phillips, is this need, I think, to keep pushing the boundaries, that we get to a certain point that it no longer stimulates, and we've got to go more and more and more to get that stimulation. So very much like a drug, depending on your drug of choice, but it's like, it seems to be that pattern that with the dopamine and that, the amygdala requiring even more, very much like social media and being addicted to that sort of thing. It's all geared towards just getting that little bit more. So how do we nudge the envelope to get a little bit more stimulation? Because we've seen it all. So what else is left?
Yeah, it's like the alcoholic having to drink 20 pints to get drunk, isn't it? Instead of if you're a lightweight, and if you can only have one pint at the beginning. So you do 100% become desensitized to it. But I know, as myself growing up in the 90s as a teenager, groups of lads at school, we would hand round these VHS videos.
Yeah.
And for a young mind, some of them was not good, James. There was like bestiality on there. There was all sorts of stuff that I watched that I think to myself, oh my God, if my kid watched that, that would be crazy. And these were being handed around. Everybody was watching absolute craziness.
Yeah.
And it was that was the entry level to sex education. Really, that's when it really started to kick off with the videos.
And this, formative minds and what you're watching online, you sort of start to develop your thoughts around, well, that's normal. And then you carry that through to kind of reality. And that's, a danger of, again, how women act around men and how men act around women, how women act around other women, how men act around other men.
Yeah.
So taking your cues from what you're seeing, and if you're seeing it online, you think, well, there's people doing it, so that must mean it's okay. So where's that kind of advice? Where's that sort of sounding board and guidance around what's appropriate and what's not appropriate? And young girls thinking, well, they'll do that for boys or for other girls because that's what they've seen online, and vice versa. And there's nobody there really sort of saying there's nobody there. But this is the thing. It depends on how they're consuming it, relationship with their peers, with their parents, friends, all that sort of thing. But the concerning thing is that taking cues from that, very much like you may have looked at that video and depending on your mentality, could have gone, ooh, or ooh.
Yeah, but some of it was like a distortion of reality. It was like a shocking thing where it's like a car crash type of thing where you can't help but
to what? Look,
but you're a bit. This is a shock to the system. It's like, what's going on? This is not normal.
No.
So it had that type of element, but you're right. It has grown into something completely new. But I'll just give you some of the statistics, James, on men and teens in terms of porn usage. So just to give people a bit of a understanding of how prevalent it is at the moment. So it says 73% of teens aged 13 to 17 have watched pornography online. 54% reported first seeing pornography by the age of 13. So half of kids by the age of 13 have seen it. 75% of boys and 70% of girls in the 13 to 17 age group have intentionally viewed online pornography. Frequency of using: 70% of teens who have intentionally watched pornography did so in the last week. So it's a regular usage thing. Adult men, 58% of American men have watched pornography at least once in their lifetime. 44% of men aged 18 to 29 reported watching online adult content in the past month. 50% of men aged 30 to 49 reported watching pornography in the past month. Men comprise 80% of the global audience in terms of pornography usage. So there's no real surprise there, is there?
No surprise at all. But again, my view on stats, it's like, how many guys are actually willing to admit?
Yeah, it's got to be much worse than that, do you think?
I would venture that it's a lot more than that. It's like whether you are, it's one thing to admit watching it, it's another to admit how much and how often.
So is this filling a gap in the market, James, or is this an ethical practice? Or would you say that it should be banned, controlled? Is it okay for men to watch porn? Is this a bad thing that people are paying for OnlyFans creators to show sexual images? Or is it two willing participants, one creator, one consumer?
Okay, so
ethics.
It's a service. It's a service.
It's a service. Yeah.
Prostitution. What would be really interesting is to talk to somebody doing it to get their perspective, and obviously we can't at the moment. And if you look at it, that for some it's like a supplemental income that maybe you've got, university students that are doing it to make ends meet. If somebody is struggling, that this is an income for them and a lifeline, that they can put boundaries around what they're doing and that it's safe for them to do it, I would hope. And then, so you've got, the people, the what did you call them? They're the performers or the
creators,
content
creators.
Okay. So from their perspective, what does that look like? you know, how do they sit with this thing that they're doing? And then from the other side, if it is the majority men, but obviously there's some women engaging with it as well, what their relationship with is it, you know, that if this is a replacement thing in terms of relationships, what that looks like, and if it's a necessity because there isn't a relationship and they're not able to get that from a physical person, then it serves a purpose if they're then not in a situation where they're going out and having to, you know, perpetrate something, that if it's a release, that at least it's being done in a way that doesn't impact somebody physically, for example.
Yeah.
So it's highly nuanced. I don't think there's any one particular response or answer to that, but I'm trying to put my head into the mindset of people that would be on both sides, so a creator and a consumer, and it serves a purpose. And I guess you could argue that, you know, if it's a release, that then means that that isn't then being, you know, done in a more insidious way. Then, and the same can be argued for prostitution. That, you know, it's there's sometimes a choice, there sometimes isn't a choice. That it's literally,
that's the problem,
you know,
isn't
survival.
it, James, with the choice?
It's survival.
Yeah. Because there's a real problem with sex trafficking, women being coerced into these industries, potentially against their will or through some type of addiction to drugs. Are the most of the prostitutes doing it because they're from a real, you know, stable background with a balanced mentality? I would argue probably not. So is it an exploitation thing? How can does it need to be more regulated, James, in terms of the people that are participating in producing content?
I think it is, whether it needs more regulation. That's a good question. I know that it is regulated, certainly the online space and around children as well, protection of children and pornography. Again, I know somebody who, on a parliamentary level, has been involved in that. So I know there are pretty stringent guidelines and safeguards in place. Whether they always work is another matter. I don't know that it can be 100%. But it's good to know that there are safeguards in place. But definitely, you know, I think it needs keeping an eye on to make sure that everybody involved is safe and there's no exploitation, that people aren't being, you know, there's no extortion going on, and these are vulnerable individuals on both sides. So to make sure that they're not being exploited by third parties or by the individuals themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a main point, isn't it? To get rid of any exploitation in terms of the creator side. It sort of taps into what we talked about with Andrew Tate yesterday. You know, if these are free women, consensual adults with a choice, and they want to build this type of business, you know, we could have ethical, moral arguments around: is this good for your soul? Is this good for connection? Is this a capitalist game where you're, you know, some of these creators are earning unbelievable amounts of money, but in reality, looking at the stats, the average earnings are basically $100 a month, just over $100 a month. That's what the average OnlyFans creator makes. So it's probably like any other industry. The top 0.1% pick up 99% of the earnings. So you get the people like the Bonnie Blue and the Lilly Phillips earning, they think they're earning potentially between $500,000 and $1 million a month from their content creation. But like you said, they are pushing the boat out in terms of it's gone beyond the normal sex scenes, then it's take up in the ante to something else, and now it's 1,000 men in a day, and then it's going to be, you know, where do you go
rise above the noise,
James?
Isn't it? It's like where everybody else is doing a particular thing, how do we, you know, rise above the noise and do something extraordinary?
And Ben here is asked a question basically asking about the disconnection in marriages and how is this filling a void? And is it good that sex dies down in marriages? And what do we think about that? Because, you know, sex has become something other than procreation now, James, hasn't it? I guess with the onset of the pill, it's become more like a leisure type of pleasure activity. So it is morphed into something other than the actual biological. It's more of a hedonistic act. You don't just have sex. Most people to have a baby now, do we? I would say it's got to be in the 90% of people are not having sex to have babies all the time. So and now it's morphed into something else.
Yeah, and how much of it is transactional again? I mean, again, it would be great to have somebody on of a particular generation to sort of see how the interaction between sexes, same sex, around sex is now. It's like, because we could have this perception that it's just about hooking up. It's like it's a booty call and it's very transactional, like scratching an itch. Do you want to come and have sex? It's like friendship with benefits type stuff. And, you know, is there then the same meaning attached to sex as it being a very sacred thing between two people? And that means something. Or is it just like, well, I was feeling a bit horny, so we just did it.
Is it wrong? Is either of those wrong? Sometimes
I don't know that it is.
A bit of pleasure seeking, is that bad?
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't know that it is, mate. And I'm not in a position to make any kind of judgment around that, because like how we were when we were in our sort of very early 20s. I mean, my wife and I, we got together very early in our sort of early 20s. But I mean, I was at university, and, you know, those times were quite, you know, free in that respect.
How would you feel, James, if your daughter came to you and said, I want to be an OnlyFans creator?
There's the crucial question right there. So
would you be happy and thinking this is a good way to go? Is it like on a spectrum? Say it's selling, I don't know, feet pics.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, I guess that's because there's no identity attached to that, is it? It's not your face and it's not your body. It's just
there's levels
your feet
to
or
it.
your hands. But there's still that underlying. Well, it's still. I was going to say, you know, when you bring it to home, and that's where these kind of questions really count. It's like, you know, you can comment on other people and you can comment on society, but when it's your own, when it's your child, that
because men are masturbating to these feet pics. That's what you. Even if it is just feet pics, you know, at the end of the day, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
And do you want to be facilitating? How do you feel as a father?
My knee jerk was like, I would be very uncomfortable with it. I'm just, as a father, absolutely uncomfortable with it for my daughter, because it's incredibly close to home, and it's, you know, you can't have that same level of empathy or relationship with somebody else, A, you don't know, and B, another person generally, if it's not your own flesh and blood, and your daughter is a key thing.
And so if that's the case, I'm James, are you hypocritical for watching porn?
Totally. And it makes you question the morality and your relationship with it through that lens, because it's somebody's daughter, it's somebody's wife, somebody's mother, you know. But in all these kind of situations, it's like thinking about the implications, and we can very easily just push that from our minds to be able to enjoy and be in the moment. And like we were talking the other day about, you know, whether you eat meat, whether you don't eat meat, being a vegan, not being a vegan, the consciousness around any aspect is like, if you actually start to think about it and unpack it, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So if you choose to think about something and go question my choices around it, it brings the morality into it, brings into how you feel about yourself, your identity, all those kind of things. And more often than not, it's uncomfortable and a bit painful.
Yeah, because we can be hypocritical, can't we? We can say we don't like we don't want our daughters doing it, but then you're watching.
But you go and indulge in it yourself because you can.
Maybe it's consensual, and you're detaching emotionally. But
you can make up any story in your head.
I think people should question themselves. Really, everybody shouldn't they? Instead of being so judgmental.
Well, the thing is, afterwards, it's like just sit with how you feel afterwards. You know, if you feel disappointed with yourself, if you feel like this behavior, just, I really don't like that in myself.
Yeah. Or apparently, if you masturbate 21 times a month, you decrease your risk of prostate cancer or something.
Well, that's a good thing.
I read. So
that's a good thing. Yeah.
Maybe you've got to reframe it, James.
I don't know that we need a reason to, mate, to be honest.
Yeah. Instead of the guilt thing, you're doing
concrete. It's all about my prostate. Look, don't come at me with it. It's about my prostate.
It's all about prostate. And when you go for IVF and things like that, I've had loads of clients that have done that. They send the guys off to a little room, don't they, with a porn mag
cup.
Yeah. Okay. Or should we ban that? We'll say to them, look, it's all up here. Yeah. It's a difficult one, isn't it? It brings up a lot of dilemmas.
A few guys that have been through IVF that struggle with that whole perfunctory thing.
Yeah, I would stop. That is on demand would be very, very difficult.
It's a bit like having a stress wee, like a nervous wee sometimes.
Yeah, when people I've been drugs tested as well after football matches, and it's not, and you have to produce
performance anxiety.
Go for a wee. It's like, I don't need to go for a wee now. It's a pain in the ass. But going back to Bonnie Blue and this Lilly Phillips, these are the two girls.
It's extreme versions.
They're beautiful women, aren't they? Beautiful in terms of visually. I would say they're beautiful women. It doesn't really matter too much, but they are, and obviously attracting a lot of attention from this pushing the boundaries, and they're getting a lot of judgment behind that. I personally think there's something that's foundationally maybe not okay psychologically, something that's gone, I wouldn't say gone wrong, because that's probably not a good terminology, but morphed into something that maybe won't help them in the coming years. I don't think you can do these type of things without some type of psychological consequence somewhere down the line that is probably not good, I would say. But in the short term, they're making more money in a month than I've probably made, in a lifetime.
Yeah.
So you can see why they're doing it, James, can't you?
I mean, it's really interesting. It's fascinating. I am absolutely, genuinely fascinated by it, because you could say that it's like it's the ultimate feminist statement almost. It's like, if I choose to do this, and this is my body, who's to tell me I can't do it?
Exactly. Yeah.
If and if everybody's consensual and everything is done safely, there will be safeguards around it. I'm sure. It's like, who's to pass judgment on it and say that you shouldn't be doing that, it's disgusting, blah 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 blah. But it's the troubling thing for me, as we've said, is that the need for it. Why this thing has to exist in the world. What is that as a statement around society that women are? And again, you kind of go back to that previous statement saying, well, do they feel compelled to? Do they feel the need to? But what are the environmental factors that have made this thing exist in the world? So it's more of a statement about society, I think, than the individuals taking part in it. maybe that's a bit of a copy out
is it an
thing.
echo, is it an
it's an echo chamber.
Is it a capitalist economic need? Is it because this is a way to sort of amplify your earnings very, very quickly? But as we see, most people are not earning that much money. You know, $100 a month is not really going to get you. I think
it's more nuanced. I don't know, because we don't know the individuals, but I can kind of start to make up this story in my head that it's more than just about the money. This is like almost a statement on society. It's
I can do what I want. Yeah. I can define what sex means. I'm free. Totally. Is this the ultimate feminist liberation?
It's
in a way. What do we think about them what do we think about the men, the 1,000 men lining up to sleep with a young lady in that context? What do you think about that, James?
Yeah, and again, be fascinating to get into their mindsets. Maybe it's their kind of how many minutes of fame that they're sort of part of this phenomena. You could put it down to the base level of it's about them having sex, and that, maybe there was some peer pressure. Maybe it's a group of guys that got together and go, yeah, let's go and do this. And it was a kind of a considered thing that they all sort of decided, group think, that they would go and do it. Mate, I don't know. I don't know.
Is it a moral failing of society? Is it a collapse of society? If your son was like in that lineup to go and sleep with one of these ladies, how would you feel about that, James?
Yeah, I'd have to have a long conversation with him as to why.
Yeah. And what you think viscerally you would be approving of it, or you get an instinct that maybe that's not going to be a good
again
option?
I would, because it's my son and I love him and I'm very protective of him, that would color my judgment. But I think if I was to see any of those guys, and again, you can make an image in your head, it'd be a young guy, maybe the same sort of age as him, I kind of want to go and give him a hug.
Yeah.
I'd like to sort of it makes me a bit sad, mate, to be honest. Because I would picture them like my own son doing it, and I just, it doesn't sit well.
It's sad. That's what I think we've got to put ourselves in other people's positions. Imagine that was your daughter, or that was your own son. You would have a slightly less judgmental lens, and would probably see it with a lot more compassion. I think you've got to try to understand these situations. They don't come in a vacuum. They're created by all of us. This is a whole culmination of years of,
and it's all of our responsibilities. We can't.
It's all of our responsibilities.
We can't shut it away and say that doesn't exist. Yeah. I'm not going to think about that. I think.
Yeah. This is the natural extension, James, I see of, the attention economy, which our whole social media is built up on. It's just the trajectory. I know my brother says I say that word a lot, trajectory, but it is the direction of passage when it comes to attention. It's what can I do more of? How can I be more controversial? How can I be more polarizing? And sex, like you said, sells. So it happens in the music industry. Madonna was very famous with doing this. It was sexing up a little bit more. The young ladies that are singers are wearing, less and less and less, to the point where
guys are doing the same, aren't they?
But I think the guys have definitely got a different visceral feeling towards sex. Women do hold a lot of sexual power. I would say if you went to a nightclub and a woman wanted to have sex, she would probably have a much higher chance of getting it than a man would. the average man. And that is, I'll bring some, there will be statistics on that, but I would say it is much harder for a man to acquire sex, because women are more, they should be, or are in general, more picky with the men they choose, and men.
But behaviorally speaking, do you think that's, the situation that statistically that would back it up, that, the number of guys that would go and approach girls in clubs, as opposed to the other way round of women approaching men, or, again, same-sex approaches, that I don't know, I haven't been to a club lately to sort of see, but, and I know there's, lots of clubs have shut down, and the way that kind of kids seem to kind of congregate now, it's changed. But the approaches, I'd be interested to see the statistics and percentage of male approaches to female approaches, and how that then impacts that too.
Yeah, no, that's true. But in terms of the couple more statistics on here, I would say they reckon potentially the COVID situation maybe has influenced the uptake in OnlyFans, because people needed some more money and to work online. It seems like that had
and the isolation
impact.
disconnect.
I think the figures for OnlyFans rocketed during COVID, so it's definitely one of those things.
That makes sense.
For what would we advise people to do, James, when it comes to this industry? What do we do as a society? Do we have it more regulated? Do we just open the floodgates? Because children can now go online. All it is a button to say, are you over 18 or not? Obviously, no kid who's 15 is going to say, oh, no, I'm not 18. That's basically a waste of time, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what do we do? How do you...
Well, there has to be safeguards in place, to make sure. But then, when you get to a certain age, it's like it's freedom of choice. But certainly safeguards need to be there to ensure, and I know the online community, there is a lot now done sort of digitally that can verify age, and to ensure that they aren't getting through those safeguards. But I think there needs to be the monitoring and making sure that everybody that's engaging in it is safe. Whatever that, and
maybe we shouldn't fight against the waves.
It's going to happen.
We should actually create. Why don't we focus on creating a more connected society? Because you realize once you're more connected, as sort of Gabor Mate would say, the addiction is the opposite of connection. So the more connected you are, then the less you will be addicted or wanting to participate in these things, whether it's eating sugar, alcohol, drugs, sex, porn. The more connected to yourself you are, the less you'll be likely to participate. So maybe we need to focus on ways to get more connected, James.
Well, encourage open conversation around it as well. I think all the time it's driven underground, and it's, it's dirty and, taboo, that never serves anything like this. It's again, you could sort of argue for things like prostitution, when sort of, it's illegal, it gets driven underground, and then the safety aspect just goes out the window because, people are taking risks and it's not monitored, and, people are seriously at risk because of the illegal aspect of it. So if we can just have open and honest conversations about it, but, that's maybe a little naive in terms of like having that conversation, how it impacts on a partner as well. It's not just you engaging in it, it's how it's impacting on the people around you that you love. And again, that ties into that guilt and shame being the absolute cornerstone of it. And a lot of the action is influenced and dictated by that level of shame. So if you can address the shame, then you can start to make sense of those actions. And that's a good starting point, I think.
I think it's a good start, to overcome that shame and guilt. If you are watching it. There is no real good and bad. There's only perspective, but there are moral guidelines that would probably make you feel better in the long run, more wholesome, more connected to yourself, your partner, relationships. So it's an interesting conversation, but thank you, James. And we'll wrap it up for today.
Thank you.
And we will see you and everybody tomorrow.
At 1 o'clock.
Take care, guys. Bye,
Much
James.
love, everybody. Thank you.